This Mini is an electric Mini, but it's much more than that. I think it's one of the most underrated electric cars on sale in Australia now. And I think that because it takes on challenges that other electric cars don't. It doesn't brag about its range, it doesn't brag about its sustainability or how many recycled materials it uses. This car focuses on driving, and that makes it quite unique in the EV world. Now, you can read our full written review over at carsguide.com.au, and it's on our EV Guide site section where we answer all of your EV questions that you might have. So let's get into it. First things first, pricings and specs. Now, it's impossible to talk about pricing and specs for electric cars without also talking about range. And well, on that front, the Mini's not exactly good value. You see, it'll only travel just over 200 kilometers on a single charge, which isn't great by any measure. But Mini would argue that's not the point, and I'm actually inclined to agree with them. Let's look at why. Wearing a before on-roads price tag, which starts in the region of $55,000 and tops out at well over $60K for the limited Resolute edition we're driving for this video, the Cooper SE is competing on price with cars like the base Tesla Model 3, Polestar 2, and even the Nissan Leaf, all of which have significantly more range for the same money. Even combustion hot hatches are significantly cheaper in this price range. While its driving range is very limited for what you're paying, it's worth remembering that Minis are generally in the realm of premium pricing anyway, and will attract a customer seeking a niche experience. The equipment list is relatively healthy for a Mini, with the electric version being based off the high-spec S trim from the combustion range. You'll get standard equipment like synthetic leather seat trim, an 8.8-inch multimedia touchscreen with wireless Apple CarPlay connectivity, as well as built-in sat-nav and a wireless phone charger, a 5.5-inch semi-digital instrument cluster, LED headlights, 17-inch alloy wheels, and dual-zone climate, which feels a little overkill for such a small cabin. Of course, a key part of the Mini experience is customization, and this is more what its range of variants allow. All share the same motor, range, and battery specs, but the base classic variant makes do with more limited trim choices, while the more expensive mid-grade Yours and limited edition Resolute, which we tested for this review, allow a more diverse set of color and interior trim options. Now, what can we say about design when it comes to Minis? It's not as though the brand has revolutionized things year on year. Although the one we have here is in a special edition Resolute trim, which means you get the signature green color and the white roof, which I love because every other brand does contrast roofs in black. Let's take a closer look. I will say though that the Mini is aging well, at least on the outside. Its almost timeless and classic looks betray its age, and it's been brought up to date with a few tweaks here and there, particularly in those LED headlight clusters and more contemporary wheel choices. Now, you might have seen Mini Electrics with the kind of like three-prong plug design wheels, and yeah, they're kind of fun and over-the-top electric-y, but I kind of like it when the Cooper sticks to the formula. And these are my favorite wheels that the car comes with. These are called the Tentacle wheel, and they've got the little accents in there to remind you that it is the electric version, which I love. Inside is less of a good story. While there's certainly an element of this car hiding its age with the caricatured style, it's easy to tell from its dated multimedia offering and somewhat simple digital dash that it's not the latest offering on the market. There are a few bits of older BMW switchgear in the interior too, from the touch-based indicators to the shift stick, but it's still a funky space to be in, which ultimately is the goal. Interestingly, and even from the outside, there is next to nothing to indicate that the Cooper is electric, which I actually think helps it rather than hinders it, as customers aren't faced with having to stick with a particular aesthetic as they might have to be with versions of the Hyundai Kona or MG ZS, which are electric. All right, practicality. Does anybody buy a Mini for practicality? I really hope not, because, well, just have a look at the boot. I don't have our signature CarsGuide luggage set, but you can probably see straight away there that there's just not much boot to work with. So what's it like in the cabin? Well, if you've never driven a Mini before, I'll show you. Okay, up front, it's kooky because it's a Mini. There's just a lot going on. There's a massive center dial thing, which will be familiar if you've been in any Mini before, but currently it houses a multimedia screen, and it's got kind of clunky old BMW software, which isn't the best to use. It's still a touchscreen, but you can operate it with a little center dial as well. So there are kind of multiple ways you can go about that. I like the steering wheel, and I like the funky little digital dash fitting in here, which both has a digital piece to it, but also it has like an actual analog dial that shows you how much energy you're putting down and your regen as well. It's kind of quaint, I like it. If you're any taller than me, it's going to feel a bit squashed in here too, so it's worth keeping that in mind. And these seats, while they look really cool, they're manual adjust, which is a bit of a tall order for a car that costs this much money. Okay, this doesn't look good. I know what you're thinking. And to be honest with you, it wasn't graceful to get in here either. But actually, I'm impressed that I fit it all, because Mini said one of the things that they changed when they made this car electric was they had to actually raise this rear bench up a little bit to facilitate batteries underneath. So the fact that my head isn't touching the roof, and the fact that if I slot my feet in, I can actually sit behind my own driving position, it's not as bad as you think it's going to be. To sum up then, this little car is Mini by name and Mini by nature, preferring to stick to its stylistic roots than try and change things to make it bigger on the inside. No matter which trim level you pick, the Mini Electric is powered by a single 135 kilowatt, 270 Newton meter electric motor, which drives the front wheels. It doesn't sound like much, but it's a punchy little thing in a small car, which helps the electric Mini live up to that Cooper-esque promise sold by its exterior. In fact, it will still sprint from 0 to 100 kilometers in 7.3 seconds, which, while not necessarily impressive for an electric car, isn't too shabby by warm hatch standards. Okay, let's cover off our range, our charging, and our battery. So the Mini Cooper Electric has a battery which is a smidge over 30 kilowatt hours, and that's not a whole lot. It only grants the car a range of just over 200 kilometers. And that's not great either, but again, that's not the point of the car. Having a battery so small keeps it really light, so that's really neat. And also having a battery this small means that you can charge it up really quickly. So on a DC charger at 50 kilowatts, you can charge it up in just over 30 minutes. But importantly, on an AC charger, and this is where this car really comes into its own, it has what I would consider an over-spec'd AC charger. So it charges at a rate of 11 kilowatts on one of those plugs. And that means that you can charge it up in just over 2.5 hours from virtually nothing on an AC plug. That's a grocery shop's worth of charging to get a full charge. A small advantage of having a small battery. And Mini could have easily given this car a 7.2 kilowatt charger, which still wouldn't have been too bad considering the battery size, or worse still, a 3.6 kilowatt hour charger, which is what many brands with cars' batteries this size do. So I'm really impressed with that. That's probably one of the headline specs for this car, the fact that you can charge it so fast on AC. It makes charging really convenient. Just a quick word on kilowatt hours to 100 kilometers, that new energy efficiency standard. Mini would argue that the battery pack is relatively light and therefore allows the car to maintain its signature driving experience. We'll look if that's true in a moment, but its electric consumption is rated at 17.5 kilowatt hours to 100 kilometers. Now, while that consumption number doesn't sound amazing for such a small car, I achieved a much more reasonable number of 14 kilowatt hours to 100 kilometers in an earlier week-long test. That's not bad at all. Okay, so all the specs and style in the world is great, but for me, the real selling point of the Mini Electric is the experience behind the wheel, because it really nails all of those Mini cornerstones. It's light, it's connected, it's firm, you feel everything that's going on at the front wheels at the road. And that's something that so few electric cars have tackled, let alone nailed. There's something about this car which makes it truly fun to drive, and it's one of the few cars that gives you a bit more hope that the electric future can really be fun. The power figures aren't amazing, but it is bloody quick when you put your foot down in sports mode. It's just a little bit unhinged how quickly that torque arrives. And the same could actually be said for the regen. The regen's actually really good in this car. You can recoup a lot of energy by using it, with the only mild issue being that in the full regen mode, it can be quite abrupt when you let your foot off the accelerator. It's good because it's saving you as much energy as possible, but it can just be a little stilted around town sometimes. To give you an idea of how this car compares to its rivals on the road, take a look at the Model 3, for example. That car is firm like this Mini is, but it misses a little bit of that connection to the road because of its weird steering tune and its over-techified interior. And then there's other electric cars like the MX-30, which is also a light electric car like this, but you're sitting too far off the ground to be as connected as this car feels in the corners. Again, one of the major downsides of this car is that multimedia suite. It is feeling a little old. The nav has some interesting ideas about which direction you should go when you put an address in. And the dial system here is cumbersome. And like many old BMWs, which is where this system comes from, there are just too many menus. So it's not the easiest system to use while you're on the move. I find myself wishing even for something like Tesla's massive touchscreen, as flawed as it is. The little dash here though is clever and quaint, and it suits the character of the car so well, with that little analog dial flying up when you put your power down and down when you put your regen down. It's such a great little feature of this car that speaks to its character. And look, yes, the ride is quite firm, maybe too firm for some, especially since it's a car best suited to driving around cities. And if you live in a major one in Australia like Sydney, you'll know how rough our roads can be. So you might get battered about a little bit in this car, but it's not as bad as it could be, especially since it's got quite a few lithium batteries under the floor and it weighs significantly more than the combustion version. It leaves you with a funny conundrum. Because this car is actually so much fun to drive on a curvy road, you actually kind of want to seek those out. You just have to hope that they're within distance of your limited range. And just a word on adjustability, because I do like an electric car where you can sort of change it around and customize it to your own driving preference. And in the Mini, you've got a little switch down on the dash here that adjusts either a low regen setting mode, which is quite unobtrusive. So if you're more used to driving a combustion car, maybe you'd like to use that mode, or there's a heavier regen mode. And as I said before, that can be a little bit stilted if you set that to max. So keep that in mind as well. There's also multiple driving modes. There's an efficiency mode called Green Plus, which is quite handy to have, although you have to do without some of this car's luxuries. If you put it in Green Plus mode, it turns the accelerator response all the way down, and it even switches the air conditioning off. So I think you'd probably need to be wanting to make the absolute most of this car's range to have to use that function, but it's nice that it has it. Despite its relative age, the Cooper comes with some of the key active safety items that we like to see on all cars. Read about them on our written review at carsguide.com.au, but it is worth noting this little hatch only has a 4-star ANCAP safety rating. On the one hand, it achieved this before it had been updated with some of these key safety items, but on the other hand, it is to a very old 2014 standard, so who knows how it would perform in an up-to-date test. Mini sits under the BMW umbrella, a brand which is a famous laggard for its 3-year warranty. It covers unlimited kilometers and does include roadside assist, and the battery components are covered by a more industry standard 8-year and 160,000 kilometer warranty, but it would still be nice to see improvement here. On the topic of servicing, Minis have condition-based intervals, which means the car will tell you when it's time to visit a workshop. Service costs are interesting. A basic pack covering 6 years costs just $12.80, or a smidge over $200 a year. This includes filters, fluids, and checks. Meanwhile, the much more expansive Plus pack costs over $4,000 for the same 6-year period, but it does include expendable items like brake pads and discs, as well as things like windscreen wipers. Okay, time for a verdict. I think the Mini Cooper is really surprising. It's fun to drive, it sells that Mini promise, it feels really lightweight, and it takes on that issue of drivability so well. No other electric car is doing that. This is genuinely a fun little car to drive. Most of its drawbacks are the same as the rest of the Cooper range, that old multimedia system. It's tiny on the inside, I mean, it is a Mini. But all in all, that's not the electric car's fault, and this is probably the best version of the Cooper you can buy. And as I said at the beginning, possibly the most underrated electric car on sale in Australia.